I was enjoying my morning coffee when I heard the blaring horn outside my house in Scottsdale, Arizona, and realized someone had completely blocked my garage with their pristine white Mercedes SUV. Not just partially blocked, mind you, but positioned directly in front of my driveway entrance, so there was absolutely no way I could get my truck out for work. I stepped outside, still holding my mug, and saw a woman in her mid-50s marching toward me with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. Her blonde hair was styled in that aggressive soccer mom cut that screamed management, and she wore a polo shirt with an embroidered HOA logo that looked far too official for what was supposed to be a neighborhood volunteer position. "Are you Isaac Patterson?" she demanded, not even offering a greeting. "That's me," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "And you're blocking my garage." "I'm Patricia Hendricks, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA," she announced, as if I should be impressed. "I'm here to discuss multiple violations you've accumulated over the past month." I glanced at my watch. It was 7:15 in the morning. "Could you maybe move your car first? I have to get to work." Patricia shook her head firmly. "This will only take a few minutes if you cooperate. I've documented 17 separate violations of our community guidelines." She flipped through pages on her clipboard with dramatic flair. 17. I set my coffee mug on the porch railing. "What are you talking about?" "Your trash bins were visible from the street on a Tuesday," she began reading. "Your lawn exceeded the permitted grass height of 3 inches by approximately half an inch. Your mailbox has a small rust spot that diminishes the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood. Your outdoor light fixture was left on past the 10 p.m. cutoff on 3 separate occasions. Your truck was parked in your driveway overnight instead of in your garage, which violates Section 12, subsection 4 of our bylaws." I stared at her. "You're joking." "I never joke about community standards, Mr. Patterson." Patricia's expression remained stern. "Each violation carries a $50 fine. That's $850 total, due within 14 days. "My truck was in my driveway because I was unloading equipment," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I run a construction business, and since when is there a rule about outdoor lights? The rules have always been there." "Perhaps you should have read the HOA guidelines more carefully before purchasing property in Sunset Ridge." She produced a thick packet of papers from her bag. "These are your formal violation notices. Sign here to acknowledge receipt." "I'm not signing anything," I said. "And I'm definitely not paying almost $1,000 for made-up violations. Now please move your car." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "These are not made-up violations. As HOA president, I have the authority to enforce all community standards. If you refuse to comply, I can place a lien on your property." "A lien?" I laughed, though nothing about this situation was funny. "Over half an inch of grass, over multiple flagrant violations that show a complete disregard for the rules that keep this neighborhood desirable." She crossed her arms. "I'll move my vehicle when you sign these papers." I pulled out my phone. "Then I'm calling the police. You can't just block someone's driveway." "Go ahead," Patricia said smugly. "I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about your violations as well." I dialed non-emergency and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send an officer, but it might take 30 to 45 minutes given current call volume. I called my foreman to let him know I'd be late to the job site. Patricia remained standing in my driveway, occasionally making notes on her clipboard. She took photos of my house from various angles with her phone. When I asked what she was doing, she said she was documenting additional violations for her records. 40 minutes later, a Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up. Officer Martinez stepped out, a young guy who looked tired already despite the early hour. "Someone want to explain what's going on? This woman blocked my driveway and refuses to move," I said immediately. "I'm conducting official HOA business," Patricia interjected. "Mr. Patterson has been uncooperative regarding multiple community violations." Officer Martinez looked between us, then at the Mercedes blocking my garage. "Madam, regardless of HOA business, you can't block someone's driveway. That's city code. I'm going to need you to move your vehicle." "But he hasn't signed the violation notices," Patricia protested. "That's between you and him. Move the car, please." Patricia huffed but walked to her Mercedes. She moved it approximately 10 feet forward, still on the street in front of my property, but at least my driveway was clear now. "Anything else I can help with?" Officer Martinez asked. "No, thank you," I said. Patricia leaned out her window. "This isn't over, Mr. Patterson. The fines still stand, and they increase by 10% each week they go unpaid." Officer Martinez gave me a sympathetic look as he headed back to his cruiser. I grabbed my keys and finally escaped to work, already an hour late. The job site was in North Scottsdale, where we were renovating a high-end home. My crew had already started without me, which was good. I spent the day distracted, thinking about Patricia's absurd demands. $850 for nonsense violations. I'd bought this house 6 months ago specifically because the neighborhood was quiet and well-maintained. The HOA had seemed reasonable at closing, just basic stuff about keeping properties looking decent. When I got home that evening, there was an envelope taped to my front door. Inside were the same violation notices Patricia had tried to make me sign, plus a new one. Apparently, my garage door had a small dent that constituted structural disrepair. Another $50 fine. I called my real estate agent, Monica, who'd helped me buy the place. She sounded apologetic but not surprised. "Patricia Hendricks is notorious," Monica said. "She became HOA president about 8 months ago and immediately went on a power trip. I've had 3 clients in Sunset Ridge dealing with similar harassment. Can she actually put a lien on my house?" "Technically, if the fines are legitimate and you don't pay, yes. But most of what you're describing sounds like overreach. You should get a lawyer to look at the HOA bylaws and see if these violations are even real." I thanked her and hung up, then spent the evening reading through the HOA documents I'd gotten at closing. They were dense and boring, full of legal language about maintaining property values and community standards. There were rules about lawn height and trash bins, but most of them seemed to have reasonable grace periods and warning systems before fines kicked in. Nothing Patricia had done followed the proper procedure. The next morning, I found a bright orange sticker on my mailbox declaring it non-compliant due to the rust spot Patricia had mentioned. It was barely visible, maybe the size of a quarter, where the post met the box. The sticker was far more of an eyesore than the rust. I was peeling it off when my neighbor, an older man named George, walked over from across the street. "Patricia got you too, huh?" he said. "You've dealt with her. Everyone has. She fined me $300 last month because my house numbers weren't the approved font." "The approved font, Isaac. I've lived here 12 years and those numbers have been the same the whole time." "Did you pay?" George shook his head. "I got a lawyer. Turns out Patricia has been making up half these rules herself. The actual HOA bylaws are pretty minimal. She's been citing her own amendments that were never properly voted on by the community." This was interesting. "Who's your lawyer?" He gave me a name and number. "David Chen. He specializes in HOA disputes. Good guy, reasonable rates." I called David that afternoon during lunch. His secretary scheduled me for the next day. When I arrived at his office in downtown Scottsdale, David turned out to be a sharp-dressed man in his 40s with an easy smile. "Patricia Hendricks," he said after I explained my situation. "I've been waiting for someone else to come in about her. I'm currently representing 2 other Sunset Ridge residents. George mentioned she's been making up rules, not just making them up, but enforcing them without proper authority." David pulled out a folder. "The HOA bylaws require any amendments or new regulations to be voted on by the community membership. Patricia has been issuing what she calls presidential directives and treating them as binding rules. They're not. So I don't have to pay the fines. Not only do you not have to pay them, but you have grounds to sue the HOA for harassment if you want to go that route. Though I usually recommend starting with a strongly worded letter. Most of these situations resolve once the HOA realizes they're legally exposed." David drafted a letter that afternoon, citing specific violations of the HOA's own bylaws and Arizona state regulations regarding homeowner associations. He sent it certified mail to Patricia at the HOA office address. 3 days later, I got a response. Not a letter, but Patricia herself showing up at my house again. This time she arrived at 6 in the morning, and her Mercedes was parked directly in front of my driveway once more. I opened the door in my bathrobe. "Are you serious right now? You think you can threaten me with lawyers?" Patricia's face was red. "I've been managing this community for less than a year, and I've already increased property values by 4% through strict enforcement. You're blocking my garage again, because you need to understand that I'm not going anywhere. This is my neighborhood, and I won't have residents who think they're above the rules." She thrust another envelope at me. "More violations. Your house number is faded and needs repainting. Your front door color is not on the approved list. Your landscaping includes non-native plants." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "My lawyer is going to love this. You're just giving us more evidence of harassment." "Harassment?" Patricia laughed sharply. "I'm doing my job. Maybe if you'd spent less money on lawyers and more on maintaining your property properly, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Move your car, Patricia." "Or what? You'll call the police again." "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Patterson." I did call the police again. This time, it took over an hour for an officer to arrive. Patricia spent that entire hour standing in my driveway, occasionally taking more photos and making more notes. She measured the height of my grass with a ruler. She examined my front door with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. When Officer Martinez showed up again, he looked even more tired than before. "Folks, we can't keep doing this. She's blocking my driveway again," I said. "And he's violating community standards," Patricia added. Officer Martinez rubbed his temples. "Madam, I already told you. You cannot block someone's driveway. That's city code, not HOA rules. The city code supersedes your HOA. I have every right to enforce community standards. Not by breaking city ordinances, you don't." He pulled out his citation book. "I'm going to have to write you a ticket if you don't move right now." Patricia's expression finally cracked. "A ticket? For blocking a driveway, yes. It's a $200 fine." She moved her Mercedes, but as she drove away, she shouted out the window, "This isn't over." David Chen found her persistence amusing when I updated him later that day. "She's digging herself deeper. Every interaction like this strengthens your case if we need to take this to court." "I just want her to leave me alone," I said. "We'll get there. Give it a few more days. The HOA board has to respond to my letter, and when they see the legal exposure, they'll likely rein her in." But the HOA board didn't rein her in. Instead, I received a formal notice that the HOA was scheduling a hearing to discuss my violations and potential suspension of my community privileges. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday at the community center. I showed up with David. The community center was a small building near the neighborhood entrance, with a meeting room that had a long table and uncomfortable folding chairs. Patricia sat at the head of the table with two other people. A nervous-looking younger man who introduced himself as Trevor, the HOA vice president, and a woman in her 60s named Dorothy, the secretary. This hearing is to address the multiple violations committed by Isaac Patterson, Patricia began, reading from a prepared statement. Mr. Patterson has shown flagrant disregard for community standards and has attempted to intimidate the HOA president with legal threats. David cleared his throat. Before we proceed, I'd like to establish whether this hearing is being conducted in accordance with the HOA bylaws. Article 7, Section 3 states that any disciplinary hearing requires a quorum of at least 4 board members and must be announced to the membership at least 14 days in advance. Trevor and Dorothy exchanged glances. There are only 3 board positions, Trevor said quietly. According to the bylaws, there should be 5, David said. He laid out a copy of the governing documents. 2 positions have been vacant since before Mrs. Hendricks became president. Any actions taken by an incomplete board could be considered invalid. Patricia's jaw tightened. We've been operating with 3 members because no one else wanted to volunteer. That doesn't change what the bylaws require, David said pleasantly. Additionally, this hearing wasn't announced to the general membership. My client only received notice. That's also a violation of procedure. We don't announce individual disciplinary hearings, Patricia snapped. You do according to your own rules. David flipped to another page. Transparency requirements, Article 9. All hearings must be open to community observation. Trevor looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia, maybe we should postpone this until we can review the procedures more carefully. We don't need to postpone anything, Patricia said. Mr. Patterson has violated 17 community standards. That's documented fact. Let's discuss these violations, David said. He pulled out his own documentation. Violation 1. Trash bins visible from street on a Tuesday. The bylaws state bins must be brought in within 24 hours of collection. Collection in this neighborhood occurs on Thursday. A Tuesday sighting is irrelevant. He went through each violation systematically, showing how Patricia had either misinterpreted the rules, applied them incorrectly, or cited regulations that didn't actually exist in the bylaws. By the time he finished, both Trevor and Dorothy looked mortified. Mrs. Hendricks, Dorothy said softly, I think we may have made some errors in how we've been handling this. We haven't made any errors, Patricia insisted. I've been trying to maintain standards in this neighborhood, and all I get is pushback from residents who don't appreciate the work I do. The work you do isn't the issue, David said. The issue is that much of what you're doing isn't authorized by the HOA's governing documents. My client is willing to drop this matter entirely if the HOA agrees to rescind all fines, issues a written apology, and commits to following proper procedures going forward. Trevor nodded immediately. That seems fair. I'm not apologizing for doing my job, Patricia said. Then we'll see you in court, David replied calmly. I'll be filing suit against the HOA for harassment, improper fines, and emotional distress. I'll also be requesting a full audit of HOA finances to ensure funds collected through improper fines have been properly accounted for. Dorothy's face went pale. An audit, standard procedure in cases like this, David said. Trevor stood up. I think we need to have an internal board discussion. Can we reconvene this hearing next week? We agreed and left. In the parking lot, David was grinning. Did you see their faces when I mentioned an audit? You think there's something wrong with the finances. Maybe, maybe not. But HOA board members hate audits because they're usually sloppy with record keeping. Even if everything's legitimate, it's a huge headache. They'll want to settle. But Patricia apparently didn't want to settle. Over the next few days, things escalated. I received more violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. My doormat was the wrong size. My garden hose was visible from the street. A bird had left droppings on my driveway, and I hadn't cleaned them up within 6 hours. Then Patricia made a mistake. A big one. I came home from work on Friday to find my truck blocked in. Not by Patricia's Mercedes this time, but by orange traffic cones positioned across my driveway entrance. A sign hung on the cones. No parking HOA enforcement. I called David immediately. Can she do this? Absolutely not. That's beyond HOA authority. Call the police and file a formal complaint. This is harassment. I called the police and this time requested to speak to a supervisor. Sergeant Williams arrived with Officer Martinez. I explained the situation, showed them all the documentation of Patricia's previous incidents, and pointed at the cones blocking my driveway. This has been going on for weeks, Sergeant Williams asked. Pretty much. My lawyer says it's harassment. I'd agree. He took photos of the cones and the sign. Do you know where these cones came from? I assume Patricia brought them, but I don't have proof. Officer Martinez pointed at something. There's a vehicle registration sticker on this cone, city property number. We looked closer. Sure enough, each cone had a small sticker indicating it belonged to the Scottsdale City Street Maintenance Department. These are stolen city property, Sergeant Williams said. That's a whole different issue. They loaded the cones into their cruiser and said they'd be following up with Patricia. I moved my truck out, grateful to finally have a clear driveway. The next morning, Saturday, I was woken up at 5 a.m. by banging on my front door. I stumbled downstairs to find Patricia on my porch, absolutely furious. The police came to my house, she shouted as soon as I opened the door. They accused me of stealing city property. Did you steal city cones? I asked, still half asleep. I borrowed them. The city uses them for street repairs and then leaves them sitting around the neighborhood. I was making use of available resources. That's called stealing, Patricia. I was enforcing community standards. You can't just park your contractor truck in a residential neighborhood. It's unsightly and decreases property values. It's my truck and I live here. Where else would I park it? In a storage facility like a considerate neighbor. Her voice was getting louder. I've worked so hard to make Sunset Ridge the premier neighborhood in Scottsdale, and people like you are ruining it. By existing. By parking my truck at my own house. By refusing to follow the rules. She was practically screaming now. Everyone else manages to comply, but you think you're special. Maybe everyone else is just afraid of you, I said. Which, by the way, isn't leadership, it's bullying. Patricia's face turned an alarming shade of purple. I want you out of this neighborhood. I'm going to make sure you're forced to sell. Good luck with that. I started to close the door. She stuck her foot in the jamb. I'm not done talking to you. I'm done listening. Remove your foot or I'm calling the police again. She finally left, but not before taking more photos of my house. I noticed she also photographed my truck's license plate and the construction company logo on the door. David called me that afternoon with interesting news. The HOA board held an emergency meeting this morning, without Patricia. Really? Trevor and Dorothy are terrified about the potential lawsuit and the stolen cones incident. They're voting to remove Patricia as president. Can they do that? If they have cause, yes. And she's given them plenty. The vote happens Monday evening. You should attend. Monday evening, the community center was packed. Word had spread about Patricia's behavior, and apparently, I wasn't her only victim. At least 20 neighbors showed up, many of them with their own stories of ridiculous fines and harassment. Patricia stood at the front of the room looking defiant. "This meeting is a sham. These people are simply upset about being held accountable." Trevor, looking nervous but determined, stood up. "Patricia, we've reviewed your actions over the past year. You've issued over 300 violation notices to 47 different properties. That's almost half the neighborhood." "Because half the neighborhood has violations," Patricia shot back. "You cited someone for having their Christmas lights up on December 26th, Dorothy said, reading from notes. "The bylaws allow holiday decorations through January 1st. You fined another resident because their cat was sitting in a front window, claiming it was an unauthorized pet display. That's not even a real thing. Standards require interpretation," Patricia said. "You blocked Isaac Patterson's driveway multiple times," Trevor continued. "You placed stolen city property on his driveway. The police are considering charges. I was doing my job." "Your job is to enforce the rules as written, not make up new ones," Dorothy said quietly. "We're grateful for your dedication, but this has gone too far." They held the vote. Trevor and Dorothy voted to remove Patricia as president, which was enough given the 3-person board. Patricia's face went through several colors as the decision was announced. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice shaking. "I've given everything to this community." "You've terrorized this community," said George from the back. Several people nodded. Patricia gathered her papers and stormed out, but not before stopping in front of me. "This is your fault." "No, Patricia, this is your fault." She left, and the room collectively exhaled. Trevor apologized to everyone present and promised a full review of all fines issued during Patricia's tenure. He also announced they'd be holding elections for new board members within 60 days. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I woke up to find my truck's tires slashed, all 4 of them. I called the police and filed a report, but there were no witnesses and no security cameras had caught anything. "You think it was Patricia?" Officer Martinez asked. "Who else would it be?" "Probably, but we need proof." I installed security cameras that afternoon, covering my driveway, front yard, and both sides of the house. David advised me to get a restraining order, so I filed for one, citing Patricia's harassment and the suspicious timing of the tire slashing. The hearing for the restraining order was set for the following week. In the meantime, Patricia continued to drive through the neighborhood. I'd see her white Mercedes cruising past my house several times a day, always slowing down to look. Then I discovered something interesting while reviewing the security footage. Patricia had been parking on the street directly in front of my house for hours at a time, just sitting in her car, not doing anything obviously threatening, just being there. I mentioned this to David, who frowned. "That's stalking behavior. Save all that footage." The night before the restraining order hearing, I was reviewing property documents for an unrelated reason when I noticed something in my deed. The house I'd bought included not just the lot itself, but also an easement for the street directly in front of it. That was unusual, so I dug deeper. Apparently, when Sunset Ridge was developed 15 years ago, the original developer had sold most properties with standard lots, but a few corner lots and strategic properties included easements or even full ownership of the adjacent street sections. The idea was to give those property owners control over parking and access. My property included full ownership of approximately 100 feet of street frontage. The street itself, not just an easement. It was in the deed, clear as day. I'd never noticed because it didn't affect my day-to-day life. The city maintained it as part of the public road system through an access agreement, but I technically owned it, which meant Patricia had been parking on my property. I called David immediately, despite it being almost 10 p.m. "You're not going to believe this." When I explained, he started laughing. "Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect." The next morning, we went to the restraining order hearing. Patricia showed up with her own lawyer, a severe-looking woman named Barbara, who argued that Patricia had every right to drive on public streets in her own neighborhood. "She's not just driving," David countered. "She's parking for extended periods directly in front of my client's home. We have footage showing her car remaining stationary for up to 4 hours at a time." "It's a public street," Barbara said. "Actually," David replied, pulling out my property deed, "it's not. My client owns that section of street. Mrs. Hendricks has been parking on his private property without permission." The judge looked surprised. "You own the street?" "A 100-foot section of it, yes, Your Honor. It's an unusual arrangement from when the development was built, but it's clearly documented in the deed." Barbara looked flustered. "That doesn't change the fact that it's been functioning as a public thoroughfare." "The city has an access agreement for maintenance and through traffic," David said, "but parking is at the property owner's discretion. Mrs. Hendricks has been parking there despite my client asking her repeatedly to stop." The judge reviewed the deed documents and the security footage. After a long pause, he granted the temporary restraining order. Patricia had to stay at least 100 yards from me and my property, which included the street section I owned. Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is insane. He can't own a public street." "Mrs. Hendricks, please sit down," the judge said. "No, this whole thing is a setup. He's been trying to undermine me since I started enforcing community standards. He's probably bribed people, falsified documents, Mrs. Hendricks." The judge's voice was sharp. "That's enough. The restraining order stands. If you violate it, you'll be held in contempt." Barbara managed to get Patricia out of the courtroom before she could dig herself any deeper. David and I left feeling victorious. "What are you going to do about the street?" David asked. "I'm thinking about putting up a sign," I said. I did exactly that. A nice, professional sign that read, "Private property, no parking, violators will be towed." I placed it right where Patricia always parked. The next morning, Patricia's Mercedes was parked in that exact spot, directly under the sign. I called a towing company. "I've got a vehicle parked on my private property without permission." The tow truck arrived within 30 minutes. The driver looked at the deed paperwork I showed him, verified the property boundaries, and hooked up Patricia's Mercedes. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee. Patricia came running out of her house 2 doors down just as the tow truck was pulling away. "What are you doing? That's my car. It was parked on my property," I called back. "Without permission." "That's a public street." "Actually, it's not. Check the county records." She screamed something I couldn't make out and ran back inside. 10 minutes later, she was screeching out of her driveway in a different car, a silver sedan, presumably heading to the tow yard. David called that afternoon, laughing so hard he could barely speak. Patricia's lawyer called me. "She's threatening to sue you for the towing fees." "Let her." "Oh, we will. This just keeps getting better." But Patricia didn't sue. Instead, she escalated in a different direction. I came home from work 2 days later to find the police at my house. Not Officer Martinez this time, but 2 detectives in plain clothes. "Isaac Patterson?" the older one asked. "That's me. What's going on?" "I'm Detective Sarah Reeves. This is Detective Michael Torres. We need to ask you some questions about Patricia Hendricks." My stomach dropped. "What about her?" "She's filed a complaint claiming you've been stalking and threatening her. She says you've made her fear for her safety." I laughed. though it came out bitter. "That's ridiculous. She's the one who's been harassing me for months. I have a restraining order against her." "We're aware of the restraining order," Detective Reeves said, "but we still need to investigate her claims. Can we come inside?" I let them in and spent the next hour explaining the entire situation. I showed them all my documentation, the violation notices, the security footage of Patricia parking outside my house, the towing receipts, everything. Detective Torres took notes while Detective Reeves watched the security videos. "This is quite a collection of evidence," she said. "I've had to document everything because she won't leave me alone." "Has she violated the restraining order since it was issued?" "Not that I've seen, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's been driving by when I'm not home." They asked more questions, then left with copies of some of my documentation. Detective Reeves gave me her card. "If Mrs. Hendricks contacts you or comes near your property, call me immediately." I felt uneasy after they left. Patricia was trying to flip the script, make herself the victim. But I had evidence, lots of it. That had to count for something. The next morning, I found out Patricia had been busy in other ways too. Several of my neighbors stopped by to tell me that Patricia had been going door to door, telling people I was dangerous and that they should avoid me. "She said you threatened to burn down her house," George told me, shaking his head. "I told her she was full of it, but some of the newer residents don't know any better." This was getting out of hand. I called David again. "She's committing defamation," he said. "Document every instance where someone tells you she's been spreading lies. We can add that to the lawsuit." "There's going to be a lawsuit." "Oh yes. Between the harassment, the improper fines, and now the defamation, you have an excellent case." I was hoping to avoid court, but Patricia seems determined to make this as difficult as possible. We filed the lawsuit that week. The HOA itself, along with Patricia personally, were named as defendants. The claims included harassment, defamation, improper fines, emotional distress, and violations of Arizona HOA regulations. Patricia's response was to file a countersuit claiming I had conspired to have her removed from the HOA board and damaged her reputation in the community. "Her reputation damaged itself," David said when he showed me the filing. "But this is going to make things more complicated." The legal process moved slowly. Depositions were scheduled. Both sides exchanged mountains of paperwork. I spent hours in David's office, going over every interaction with Patricia in excruciating detail. Meanwhile, the new HOA board was actually functioning like a normal organization. Trevor had been elected president in a proper community vote, and 2 new board members had been added. They rescinded all of Patricia's improper fines and issued formal apologies to affected residents. They even updated the bylaws to include better oversight and prevent future abuse. But Patricia wasn't done. She showed up at a community meeting 3 months after being removed from the board. Security footage from the community center showed her standing outside, watching through the windows. She didn't violate the restraining order by approaching me, but she was there, lurking. Then the break in the case came from an unexpected source. Dorothy, the former HOA secretary, contacted David with information. "I've been going through old HOA financial records," she told us during a meeting at David's office. "Patricia asked me to dispose of some boxes of documents after she was removed from the board, but I kept them instead." Something felt wrong. She laid out bank statements and receipts on the conference table. Patricia collected thousands of dollars in fines during her time as president, but a lot of that money never made it into the HOA's main account. David leaned forward. "Where did it go?" "Into a separate account that Patricia opened in the HOA's name, but only she had access to." She said it was for enforcement activities, but there's no authorization for such an account in the bylaws. We spent the next hour reviewing the documents. Patricia had collected over $40,000 in fines during her 11-month presidency. Only about $15,000 had been properly deposited into the HOA's regular account. The rest had gone into this secret account, and from there, it had been spent on all sorts of things. A new laptop, professional photography equipment, expensive office furniture, even a few personal purchases that had nothing to do with HOA business. "This is embezzlement," David said quietly. Dorothy nodded, looking distressed. "I should have caught it earlier, but Patricia handled most of the finances herself. She said she was streamlining things." "We need to take this to the police," I said. David agreed. We contacted Detective Reeves, who referred us to the Financial Crimes Unit. 2 days later, detectives were interviewing Dorothy and reviewing the documents. The investigation took another 6 weeks. During that time, Patricia apparently realized something was wrong because she stopped going out much. Her Mercedes stayed parked in her driveway. The silver sedan disappeared, and George told me he'd heard she'd sold it. Then one morning, I woke up to police cars on Patricia's street. Not just 1 or 2, but 4 cruisers and an unmarked detective vehicle. I watched from my window as officers knocked on her door. Patricia answered, still in her bathrobe. There was a brief conversation, then one of the officers pulled out handcuffs. Patricia's face went from confused to terrified as they arrested her right there on her front porch. George came over as the police cars drove away. "Did you see that?" "Hard to miss. What do you think they got her for?" "I might have an idea." The news broke later that day. Patricia Hendricks, former Sunset Ridge HOA president, had been arrested on multiple charges including embezzlement, theft, and filing a false police report. The false report charge apparently stemmed from her claims that I'd been threatening her, which the investigation had proven were fabricated. David called me that evening, sounding pleased. "This changes our lawsuit significantly. Criminal charges for embezzlement make our civil case much stronger." "What happens now?" "Patricia's lawyer will probably try to negotiate a settlement to make our lawsuit go away. The HOA itself will definitely want to settle since they're liable for Patricia's actions while she was president. You're looking at a significant payout." He was right. Within 2 weeks, the HOA's insurance company offered a settlement of $75,000 to drop all claims against the HOA. Patricia's personal assets were frozen pending the criminal case, but her lawyer indicated she'd agree to a separate settlement once the criminal matters were resolved. I accepted the HOA's settlement. Trevor apologized profusely on behalf of the board, and we agreed to move forward with no hard feelings. The money was nice, but more importantly, I finally had peace. Patricia's criminal trial took months to work through the system. She eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding prison time. She got 3 years probation, had to pay full restitution to the HOA and everyone she'd improperly fined, perform 500 hours of community service, and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. The personal settlement came through during her probation, $25,000, plus a written apology that her lawyer probably drafted but she had to sign. The apology was stiff and formal, but seeing her signature on it felt like closure. She moved out of Sunset Ridge 2 months after her sentencing. Someone told me she relocated to Tucson, but I didn't care enough to verify. She was gone, and that was all that mattered. Life in the neighborhood returned to normal. The new HOA board actually did their jobs properly, focusing on real issues like maintaining common areas and organizing community events, rather than measuring grass height with rulers. I still have the sign up on my section of street. Private property, no parking. Most people respect it, though occasionally I have to remind someone. It's become a bit of a conversation starter, actually. New neighbors always ask about it, and I end up telling them the whole story. The security cameras stayed up too. Better safe than sorry. Though these days they mostly just record squirrels and the occasional delivery driver, George and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We grab beer sometimes and laugh about the absurdity of it all. "Remember when she measured your grass with a ruler?" he'll say, shaking his head. That should have been our first clue she was crazy. David and I stayed in touch too. He sends me referrals occasionally, other people dealing with HOA nightmares who need someone to talk to about how to survive the process. I'm happy to help. Nobody should have to deal with what Patricia put me through without support. The funny thing is, I actually care about the neighborhood now. I keep my property maintained, not because of rules or fines, but because I want to. I planted new flowers last spring. I repainted my mailbox, rust spot and all, in a nice shade of blue that definitely isn't on any approved list because there is no approved list anymore. My construction business is doing well. The truck still parks in my driveway every night, right where it belongs. Sometimes I look at it and remember Patricia's face when I told her I owned the street. That memory never gets old. The lawsuit money went toward a vacation I'd been putting off. 2 weeks in Hawaii, just me and the ocean and no HOA drama. It was perfect. When I came back, I had a tan and a refreshed perspective on life. One afternoon about a year after everything settled, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Patricia. But it was just a young couple who'd recently bought a house 3 streets over. "Are you Isaac Patterson?" the woman asked. "That's me. We heard you had problems with Patricia Hendricks before she left. We bought her old house." I felt a pang of sympathy. "How's that going?" "Interesting," the man said. "We found some things in the garage she left behind. Boxes of files mostly. HOA stuff. We were going to throw them out, but we thought maybe you'd want to see them first. Curiosity got the better of me." "Sure, I'll take a look." They brought over 3 boxes of documents. Inside were copies of all Patricia's violation notices, photos she'd taken of various properties, and detailed notes about her plans for the neighborhood. It was obsessive. Pages and pages of complaints about residents, ideas for new rules she wanted to implement, even drafts of violation notices for things that hadn't happened yet. There was also a folder with my name on it. Inside were dozens of photos of my house from every angle, notes about my daily schedule, copies of my truck's registration, even printouts of my construction company's website. She'd been documenting everything about me, building some kind of case file like I was a criminal. It was creepy as hell. I took photos of everything with my phone, then called David. "This is stalking evidence," he said after I sent him the pictures. "Way beyond what we had before. If Patricia violates her probation in any way, this could send her to jail." "I don't want to deal with her again," I admitted. "I just want this really to be over. Keep the files as insurance. If she ever contacts you or comes near you, we'll use them. Otherwise, let her fade into whatever life she's building in Tucson." I kept the boxes in my garage, tucked away but accessible. The young couple were relieved to be rid of them, and I was glad to have the evidence, just in case. But Patricia never contacted me again. The restraining order expired after 3 years, but she never showed up. I occasionally wonder what she's doing now, whether she learned anything from the experience, whether she's terrorizing some other neighborhood with made-up rules and parking lot tyranny. Probably not. People like Patricia rarely change, but that's not my problem anymore. My problem these days is deciding whether to expand the garden beds or put in a small patio. The new HOA board approved my plans for either one. No hassle, no drama. Just a simple form and a reasonable review process. I'm thinking about the patio. Maybe get a nice grill, host some barbecues. George says he makes excellent ribs. We could invite the neighbors, actually build the sense of community that Patricia always claimed she was protecting but really just destroyed. The street I own is still there, of course. Every time I pull into my driveway, I see that little sign. Private property, no parking. It makes me smile. Such a small thing, but it represents everything I fought for. The right to exist in my own home without harassment. The right to park my truck in my driveway. The right to have a rust spot on my mailbox if I want one. Basic things, really. Things that shouldn't require lawyers and police reports and court cases. But Patricia made them complicated, and in doing so, she destroyed her own life. The embezzlement charges, the probation, the forced move, the permanent ban from HOA service, all of it could have been avoided if she'd just been reasonable. Instead, she chose to block my garage and learned, much to her detriment, that I owned the street she parked on. Sometimes I drive past the spot where she used to park her white Mercedes, right under that sign. The pavement is the same as it's always been, no different from any other stretch of road. But knowing it's mine, knowing I fought for it and won, makes it special. Trevor told me last month that the neighborhood has never been better. Property values did increase, but not because of strict enforcement of made-up rules. They increased because people actually want to live here now. Word got around about Patricia's removal and the board's reforms. Sunset Ridge became known as the neighborhood that stood up to HOA tyranny and won. We get new residents regularly, and they're always surprised by how relaxed things are. I heard HOAs were nightmares, they say. This isn't bad at all. It wasn't always this way, I tell them. Then I share the story, watching their expressions change from curiosity to disbelief to anger to relief. So you actually own the street? They always ask. 100 feet of it, yeah. That's amazing. It really is. Not just the street ownership, though that's a fun quirk. The amazing part is living in a place where I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next ridiculous violation notice. Where I can come home after a long day of work and just relax without worrying about my grass being half an inch too tall or my truck being visible from the street. The amazing part is the community we've built in Patricia's absence. Real community based on mutual respect and reasonableness, not fear and compliance. George organized a block party last summer. 50 people showed up. We grilled, kids played in the street, someone brought a karaoke machine. It was chaotic and loud and probably violated a dozen of Patricia's old imaginary rules. It was perfect. I stood in my driveway that evening, beer in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. My truck was parked behind me. My grass was maybe a little long. My mailbox had a new small rust spot forming, and none of it mattered because I was home, truly home, in a place where I belonged. Patricia tried to take that from me. She tried to make me feel unwelcome in my own house, tried to control every aspect of my life through bullying and harassment, and made up regulations. She failed spectacularly, and in the process, taught the entire neighborhood a valuable lesson about the difference between leadership and tyranny. I don't hate her anymore. I did for a while, that hot burning anger that kept me up at night. But time and distance and victory have mellowed that into something closer to pity. She must have been deeply unhappy to behave the way she did. Deeply insecure, needing to control others to feel powerful. That's sad, really. But it's not my responsibility to fix her or understand her or forgive her. My responsibility is to myself, to my home, to my peace of mind, and I've fulfilled that responsibility. The lawsuit is settled. The criminal case is closed. The restraining order did its job. Patricia is gone. Life goes on. I finished my beer and went inside, walking through the house I'd fought so hard to keep comfortable. Every room felt like a victory. The living room where I'd spent hours reviewing HOA bylaws. The kitchen where I'd made countless phone calls to lawyers and police. The bedroom where I'd laid awake, worried about what Patricia would do next. All of it was just space now, just rooms, no longer battlegrounds. The war was over. I'd won. Not just the legal victory or the financial settlement, but something more important. The right to live my life without interference from petty tyrants with clipboards and measuring tapes. The next morning, I was leaving for work when I noticed something. A new family had moved in 2 houses down into the house where the nervous couple used to live. They had a truck similar to mine, also with a company logo on the door. It was parked in their driveway, bold as brass. I smiled. Welcome to the neighborhood, I thought. You're going to like it here. And I pulled out onto the street, my street, technically, and headed to work, leaving Sunset Ridge peaceful and quiet in my rearview mirror. Just the way it should be.